Hey everyone, Dave here with Philly Tech Entrepreneurs, our podcast where we feature members of the community and their subject matter expertise. Today I'm speaking with Peter Croce. I hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. Peter is a product lead who loves building teams to do their greatest work while having fun along the way. He zooms in with design engineering peers, leaning on his backgrounds as a designer and software engineer, and zooms out with business leaders and users to capture the essence their needs and goals in digital products and services. So we're going to be talking a lot about that aspect of Peter, but as well as his work over at Probable Futures, which has a number of, if I'm not mistaken, sort of climate change, climate prediction models, graphs, data, visual, a lot of visual stuff. So, Peter, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Doing well. How you doing?
I'm
Enjoying this
doing, yeah,
lovely
I'm doing,
February?
enjoying the weather. I don't know if that's while we're on the topic, whether this is expected or not. We're having some great weather in October in Philly, aren't we?
It's gorgeous. Yeah. Yeah. If we could just keep this, I'd be all right with that.
Right? Yeah, let's just make this last all the way into March. But we know that's not going to be the case. Um, if I'm not mistaken, you know a thing or two about weather, and you're doing some interesting stuff over at Probable Futures. I was on the website earlier, kind of checking it out, and getting myself very nervous about the future. So it's how I like to begin every podcast, getting very, very concerned. So tell us a little bit
I'm curious
about
to hear your thoughts.
what you guys are up to over there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess background on me, I got into tech after not initially studying it or anything in college. I kind of realized that if I wanted to have an impact on the world, there were a couple domains where I could do that, where there was like high leverage in the modern economy and the things that are in demand. And one of the things that seemed really interesting to me was technology. So I got into it for that reason, wanting to be able to kind of have big tools to make an impact in the world. And so I initially got into some design and engineering, and I did some stuff for just like friends and family clients, building like websites for them and stuff. And I guess entrepreneurial, because that's a topic of this conversation. And then, I kind of fell backwards into product management, which is often, if there are others who are listening who are familiar with that, I hear that a lot, where I was just in a position where someone said, we need you to start doing this stuff that's kind of like product management. And I was like, what is that? I haven't heard of that role. And so I fell into it and really enjoyed it. And so I did that for a while. Most recently, I was in an agency in New York City called Postlight, and they have done a whole bunch of really interesting work for a lot of different people, from finance fields to medical to subway systems in New York City with the screens underground and building out custom APIs to get those messages out. So I did a lot of work across a lot of different domains, and just kind of looking at the world, I realized that I really wanted to work on climate change. I actually had for quite some time, but I realized that at that moment, it was really the right time. And I was very fortunate that actually a client walked through the door and said, we have this climate change project. And as it turns out, I'd been hosting some meetups at our office. And so people knew that I was into climate change. That was the topic of the meetups. And so they said, you should be staffed on this project, And so I worked on that project initially. And then I went client side. And so I was able to work out an arrangement with that agency where I actually went and worked for this climate change initiative that I now work for, still in a contract capacity, but it's mostly what I'm working on nowadays. So what are we doing? So Probable Futures is a nonprofit climate literacy initiative. What does that mean? You ever heard of climate literacy? I never had. And so climate literacy is this idea of really understanding what it means to live in a changing climate. Living in a changing climate is different from living in a stable climate. And so far, we've only lived in a stable climate. But there are certain skills that you need to live well in a changing climate. And those are fundamental in the same ways that having a fiduciary understanding and being good with money. Everyone needs to have some kind of like understanding with money just to exist and run a business in this world. And nowadays, there's this other literacy that everyone has to have, and that's digital literacy. 20, 30 years ago, if you were the CEO of a company and you didn't have a digital strategy, or you got hacked or something, you weren't really on the hook as the CEO, but now you are. And so there's this responsibility of these basic literacies in the business world and broadly across society, but definitely in the business world. And we believe that living in a changing climate has all these different changes. It's going to require doing business in ways that are aware of what it's like to live in a changing climate, because it's going to be different. It's not going to be apocalypse. You see all these movies of like apocalypse, but it's going to be different. And so it's going to require some climate literacy. And so we offer that. And we have a public platform, digital tools, digital products that I've been fortunate to participate in building. And those are tools that anyone can find on their own online. So we have this like public education platform that's basically a curriculum anyone can use online. And then we also have these maps that people can see the way the world will be under different climate scenarios. And this is where it becomes very practical. So if I'm a business leader and I know that, I'm part of a supply chain or something like that, I'm dependent on other parts of my supply chain, then I know that there are certain conditions, maybe I don't think about it much, but there are certain conditions in those places that must stay true for my suppliers to continue supplying stuff to me. So that's just one example. You could use the maps that are global in extent to look at any different climate conditions. We have 27 different maps that cover a really wide range from heat, precipitation, drought, wildfire, to see what are the conditions going to be in these different scenarios. And that way, people broadly across society and business leaders too can plan and prepare and say, okay, so we're going to see certain scenarios, because we will, regardless of all the mitigation efforts that people are doing to reduce carbon emissions and stuff like that, we are going to see some change. But then you can also actually look at some of those farther out scenarios that may be really challenging. And you can say, okay, we actually need to avoid those scenarios. So what can we do to reduce our emissions? So with this climate literacy and with these tools that we make available for people, people can both work on resiliency efforts. So trying to make sure their business or their government or Philadelphia itself is resilient to climate impacts and the way the world will change, but also on those mitigation efforts to say, okay, it would actually be really bad if we got to 3 degrees of warming, for instance, and then work to avoid that. So I'll stop there. That was a lot, and open it up for any questions you have.
For sure. I mean, that's it's such an interesting concept. I've had a number of conversations so far with this podcast. This one is unique in many ways. A lot of them have the theme of like planning, but planning for things like maybe selling your business or things like that. Planning for climate change is a first. And I can imagine maybe in the coming years we'll start to see this role kind of become more formal, sort of like your climate strategist or something like that, who will maybe audit your business and your exposures to various kind of climate challenges that might be affecting, your supply chain, the people that you work with. Business is so global nowadays. It's obviously important to kind of understand what you may be in for in the next 5, 10 plus years. At the same time, this sounds very visual. You mentioned some different tools, things like that. I don't know if there's anything you can kind of show to help illustrate the point, but it would be neat to kind of see that, because I think in this case, it's very, significant to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with a little bit of just context. So when we think about climate change and where we've been, where we're going, what are you seeing now?
It is still showing. It said that you shared your screen, but it was still black. But sometimes it just takes a little bit to load.
Okay. Yeah, it said screen sharing paused.
Let's see.
Still saying.
Just give it, 5 or 10 seconds, maybe. Unfortunately, still not seeing it at the moment. It's weird.
Yeah, that's weird. I've had this
Yeah.
before a couple of weeks ago. Try that again.
Try one more time. If not, we may all have to use our imaginations, which is doable.
Drop off and come back. Do the old reboot.
Sure, give it a shot.
Can you edit? I don't know if you can edit.
We'll figure it out.
Okay.
This would be a great time to introduce sponsors if we had some, but we don't. So we will just kind of sit here and wait for Peter to do his reboot and see if it works. Peter, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Here we go. I see it
There
perfect.
we go.
Take it away.
Turn it off and turn it back on again. It always works. All right. So we were talking about climate change, and we were talking about how this really affects us and how we can think about living within it, within this new context. So we can ask, what is the context for climate change? And it turns out that humans, we've been around for about 200,000 years. And for most of that time, we were mobile. We lived by hunting and gathering. And when you look at this chart, you can understand why. Because the climate moved around a lot. So we're looking at a chart of global average temperature. So this is a way of understanding what the climate was. And you can see that the climate moved up and down, and you have all this wide range. So people moved around because that was the rational thing to do when the nice places didn't stay nice, because that's what this means, is the nice places are moving around. You don't have these, like a place, Philadelphia, staying a nice place to be for a long time. But then you have this stabilization that happened about 10,000 years ago. And at this point, 12,000 years ago, at this point, people settled all around the world, all in different places, all at the same time. And so why did they all do this? They weren't able to coordinate 12,000 years ago. They didn't have the internet. Well, turns out it's because the climate stabilized, right? And you can see that in this chart. And so when the nice places stayed nice, people settled, and they were able to then start building up all of this civilization that we have and everything on top of it. So you had a stable climate, then you had communities and cultures building in persistent places over time, then building governments and infrastructure, and then industry to build faster than ever before. And then you have all these other useful abstractions on top, like software and finance and all these other things. And some people say, finance is the center of the world. It is doing a lot now. And software is eating the world, right? It's doing a lot. But both of these things are only possible because of this stability that all the rest of civilization exists on top of this stable climate. And so that context tells us that actually we need to understand some things about the way the world will be so that we can keep it stable. We want to keep being able to be entrepreneurs in this changing world. And so we need to understand the way the world will be. And so we built this platform, and it helps people gain that climate literacy, that understanding. So you can walk through yourself in like a Saturday morning or something. You can read through this kind of maybe it'll take you a couple hours to read through and understand like what we're talking about when we talk about this context for climate change. Or you can watch a 5-minute video. That's a great place to start too. But then you can also use these maps. And so the maps are global. And this is actual data about the way the world will be under different climate conditions using modeled climate scenarios. That's not data we generated. It's data that has been created over many decades by climate scientists who have been working on this for a long time. All the data is actually open source. What we've done is actually build this wrapper around it, I guess you could say, this interface and experience for people, because to access this data without this, you have to like FTP on a server and then like download it. And then you probably need some climate science expertise to understand it, which I don't have. We have climate science partners who like I work with, and they help me understand how to make this stuff into maps. And then my team and I, the engineers and the designers and I, we pick up on like making this usable. So we built this application and like figured out what kinds of colors we want to use and like where we want to put the bins and all these other kinds of things. Like what are people going to need, like search for a place, or maybe they're going to need to download screenshots of a place, or they're going to need to like get some embeddable maps, if you want to embed these maps on your own place. So all of this stuff here is all open sourced. And it also, we have open APIs that anyone can use. So we actually offer integrations. So if you're working on a project and you want to say, bring some data in, you want to know like how many days above 90 will there be in any place in the world in different scenarios, you can do that. And we also have total annual precipitation, change in snowy days, change in dry and hot days, change in the wettest 90 days, change in frequency of the 1 in 100-year storm, change in likelihood of year plus drought. So looking at drought and wildfire, looking at other different temperature thresholds that we could cross, average temperature, loss of like frost nights and freezing days, nights above 20. So it's like, it's hard to sleep, if it's too hot and you don't have AC. Fortunately, a lot of us in Philly do have AC, but in some places, they don't have a lot of AC. And so it can really be a problem there. And then heat and humidity combinations, because as the climate warms, it's also getting more humid. So you can use these maps to explore the world and start to look at, okay, what are these scenarios that we need to prepare for? And you can see how it changes. You can see how the number of days above 90 that we're increasingly getting in Philly. You can see how those change and how it would change in different worlds. So you can click on the map, you can actually see this data. And when you use the API, if you're interested in doing an integration, which we have docs that are hopefully good, and would love any feedback that anyone has on these, you can actually access the API or use our maps or anything like that. The API will give you data like this. So it'll give you like point data. You want to throw it a address, it will throw you back some information about the way the world will be in the future, depending on which map you've asked for. So that's what we're offering, and this is now something that people are using in a wide variety of different contexts, which I'm happy to talk about too. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Any questions that you have?
Very neat. Yeah, I just love visual data, and I could see how someone could get lost in this for hours. I'd love to hear some kind of quick bullet points on the different ways people are using this, just to kind of inspire some ideas that and so yeah. What are the current sort of client user base like?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so finance, supply chain, we have people in education using it. We have people in Hollywood, big like production companies who are using it to try to understand how do we tell better stories about the way the future will be, because a lot of the stories are, apocalypse or like we solve climate change or something. And neither of those are true. We're actually going to have something in between. Future is going to be different, but it's not going to be an apocalypse in the near term. And so, yeah, a lot of different contexts. Some on the finance side are very big banks, like some of the biggest in the US, who are using it to really understand, like, how will the world be different and how do we need to update, how we think about the world based on that. Also consulting companies. We've worked a lot with McKinsey. And so thinking about how do we bring this data and these ideas into boardrooms so that people in the executive suites can really understand how we need to make different decisions. And then also governments. So working with, people in elected positions, their cabinets and stuff. Of, how do we need to prepare for this? So maybe we need more cooling centers or more hours allocated to cooling centers in Philadelphia. So those are some examples.
Very neat. Yeah, I mean, you sort of expect, sort of some governments, maybe, education things, but it's cool to hear about the private sector leveraging the data as well for their own ways. So thanks so much for sharing this with us, Peter. For people that want to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more about what you guys are up to at Probable Futures, how can they do that?
Yeah, feel free to go to probablefutures.org. Or reach out to me, P. Croce, Croce, at probablefutures.org.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks.